Greetings, everyone. I'm Jack Reeder with Future Pastimes, and we are reading Dune. We are on our 15th chapter, and it is a doozy. This is a really long chapter. It's also a chapter that has been adapted in every version of Dune that has been filmed, so the Lynch movie, the Villeneuve movie, and the miniseries. It's a critical scene, and it's the one where we get to meet Dr. Kynes for the first time as Kynes accompanies Duke Leto, Paul, and Gurney on an ornithopter ride into the desert to observe spice production. So we're learning a lot in this chapter. We're learning how the spice is harvested out on the sands and that whole procedure where there are spotters looking for sandworms who apparently always show up, and then the carryalls that come in to whisk the harvester away before the sandworm can destroy it. We learn about the still suits and how the Fremen manufacture the best still suits and how it's really important that you have them if you're going to be in the desert for any amount of time, because it really helps you to prevent loss of water from your body. And we learn that Kynes is a man who walks in two worlds. So Paul picks up right away that while he talks a lot about being the imperial planetologist and a subject of the emperor, Paul is able to piece together that Kynes is a Fremen as well. And the Duke senses this as well. The Duke has to carefully try to convince Kynes to let them have access to the ecological testing stations that aren't being used because they have all the equipment that they might need to repair their old and broken equipment, but that also Kynes could be instrumental in helping them to get relationships with the Fremen themselves. But Kynes is not convinced, and in fact, the very first line of this chapter talks about how his first encounter with the people he has been ordered to betray left Dr. Kynes shaken. So Kynes has been ordered to betray House Atreides. It's not explicitly said ordered by whom, but the implication is that it's the Emperor. And in fact, the very beginning of the chapter is another passage from Princess Irulan. This is from In My Father's House, where she's talking about a moment from her past where she was with the Padishah Emperor Shaddam, and they were looking at a portrait of Duke Leto, and the Emperor mentions, I would that you'd been older when it came time for this man to choose a woman. And Princess Irulan is able to deduce that the Emperor really wished that Duke Leto had been his son and not his enemy, which was because of political necessities. So the clues are there. We understand that Dr. Kynes, he is the Emperor's man, but because he's also a Fremen, he's really kind of trying to play both ways on both sides. This is a fantastic chapter, which is one of the reasons why it has always been adapted in film. They fly out there to observe it, and Kynes talks about how they have the spotters out there looking for worm sign, which is what happens when a sandworm comes to attack the spice mining, which it always does. So it's only a matter of time. And in fact, worm sign does come, and they expect the carryall to show up, but it does not show up. So Duke Leto has to lead a daring rescue to get all of the men working on the harvester out in time before the sandworm destroys it. And the chapter ends with Kynes being really impressed that what made the Duke angry was not losing all of that spice, but the threat to his men, and that he was more concerned about the welfare of his people than about the spice production itself. And so despite everything else, Kynes has to admit he really does like Duke Leto. And so it's a nice kind of uplifting after all of the setback of what happens in the chapter. It's interesting that one thing that does not happen in this chapter that has happened in pretty much all of the adaptations is Paul's exposure to the raw spice up close and how it has a big effect on him. In the recent Villeneuve movie, he goes almost into a little bit of a spice trance and loses track of time. He's hearing voices and getting a little bit of some prescience, some Kwisatz Haderach stuff, and then Gurney has to show up and drag him back to the ornithopter to get out. In the Lynch movie, it's when all the guys are piling into the ornithopter and all the raw spice, and he does have a waking vision that's brought on by the spice. So it's interesting that has been consistently added into the adaptations, but it doesn't really happen in this chapter at this point. I think I really appreciate the all of the details that this chapter gives you, especially on the workings of the still suits. And another big thing that happens in here is all of the signs and portents and the mythology that Kynes, having grown up on Arrakis, is familiar with. He knows about the legends. He knows about the Lisan al-Gaib and all of that stuff, and just how time after time during this chapter, Paul keeps demonstrating the things that the legends say he will demonstrate, his insights, his language, the things that he says and does. And Kynes has to keep telling himself, look, this is just primitive people's superstition. I know that this can't be real, but dag, this keeps happening, and it really does fit perfectly in. And at some point, Kynes is worried that the Fremen, or not the Fremen, but the workers, some of whom very well could be Fremen, not deep desert, but city Fremen, have kind of blown his cover when one of them says Liet. And because, again, the Atreides at this point, they don't know that Kynes is Liet. They're not even sure that Liet is a person, and maybe not just a mythological figure or a deity. They're leaning towards it's probably a person, especially after their meeting with Stilgar. But because of everything that happens, and Kynes is trying to play it cool. He's trying to keep his cards close to his vest, but Paul is in full Bene Gesserit mode. And so he's picking up on the half-truths, he's picking up on the evasions, and all the other signs. So it's a really great, action-packed and detail-filled chapter that I've always appreciated. It's one of the reasons why I think that this is my favorite Dune book out of all of the Dune books, because it has so many really fantastic set pieces. I love the scene with the Gam Jabbar and the pain box, and Gurney training with Paul early on before they have left Caladan, the hunter-seeker scene. And this scene is one that, by the time I read this, I was very much hooked on this book and was ready to see it through. So hopefully, if you're reading along, especially for the first time, and you've gotten through this chapter, you too are now hooked as well. Let me know in the comments what you think of this chapter, what your favorite bits are from it. A lot happens. It's the longest chapter so far that we've read, and a lot goes on. There's not an extra excessive word in there, maybe some of Gurney's songs, but even there's little hidden messages in there. It's nice how Gurney is listening to the conversation that Kynes and the Duke are having as they talk about certain qualities of the Duke's men, and Gurney switches right into, I'm an owl in the desert and I see everything. It was a nice touch. So again, leave your comments about what you think of this chapter, how things are going, if you have any questions, and let's continue reading Dune. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.